All right, thank you, Gary. You guys hear me at the back? All right, let's go because cocktails are about to start. So anyway, I wanted to just a kind of introduction here. It's just really around not building slow, building smart, and I want to actually challenge all you guys. You guys are the thought leaders of the industry. You guys are the leading architects. You're the one involved with the governments and the private hospital operators around master plans and functional briefs and so on. And a lot of the concepts I'm going to talk about, that's when you have to get in, not when we're building a hospital and a builder's on board. It's too late for a lot of these things. So put that mindset on as I go through my presentation here today. So a couple things. We're faced with a very challenging environment here in Australia, and I think the case is compelling to think differently and to build differently. You know, we've got these escalating capital costs, extended time frames when we're building hospital. Labor and material costs have surged. We've got huge labor shortages, as we talked about today, and bespoke just simply takes too long, and it's too rigid. I just thought I'd just share this data with everybody just as a bit of a background, but you can see what's happening to our material costs. They're up almost 50%. Our labor costs, you know, in certain states around Australia, we're hearing up to 15% year on year in certain trades and so on. So just think on that for a second. A little bit of a summary for everybody is, there you go, materials, specialized labor, and so on. And guess what? If we look at the next 5 years to 2030, it's not going to get any better. So that was pre-pandemic levels to today, and we're expecting another 50% surge in materials in the next 5 years. So what's the best way to address these rising cost pressures? And I think one of the first things in the research that I was able to take, and I encourage a lot of you guys get out there and research as well, is to embrace modular and standardized construction. And so what is it? It's when we build things or components off-site, and they're repeatable, and we efficiently and high quality assemble them on-site. And so what does? It speeds up construction, reduces labor cost, and I'm going to give you a real-world example here today for patient bedrooms, which is we call head walls or our modular bed heads. And these three sites here that we're looking at today were built in Australia the last 2 years. One of them you can see uses the stainless steel MSP panels. The one in the middle has individual outlets, and the third one actually hides the services down the side. These are built trade after trade. So someone comes in, runs the medical gas pipe work down, the electrician fits off all the electrical, then we have nurse call and data comms, and then we have a joiner that comes in and builds a bespoke joinery package. This isn't new, it's not innovative, but it's something for some reason, we haven't embraced in Australia despite 30 years of building it modular in Europe and North America. We're still doing it bespoke, project by project. What if I told you that this solution here would cost between 20 and 40% less, depending on the materials? It includes all services from Australia's leading medical gas and electrical supplier, which is ESCO. And it's all built prefab in a factory environment, installs in 4 hours per patient bedroom. Yes, you can still change your colors. You can have the noggins on the side, the dark wood. You don't have to have the dark wood. You can have bowl noses. There's lots of different design availability for architects and for health planners to design whatever the client wants. Another thing that we can do is smart design and adaptable templates. And these are proven templates. They're not first time ever used. An example I'm going to give you here is around modular operating room ceilings. And this is how we currently build operating theaters in Australia, or at least 95% of the time still. They're stick-built, they're conventional. We need some sort of structural from the slab down. We have to have multiple mechanical ductworks. And second here, we have to have cotton reels. We have to have individual lighting systems between 12 and 24 lighting fixtures. And there's often, project after project, there's clashes in design, there's clashes in trades. We see a HEPA filter with a equipment ceiling cover going over the HEPA filter by a quarter because it wasn't coordinated properly, and so on. And so a solution to all that is the modular oil ceiling. And for those of you who don't know, that's the blue shade that I just highlighted there in the ceiling. And what it does, it actually provides a number of things. It doesn't just provide the HEPA filtered air delivery, but it does the room lighting. all the structural mounts, and this is a very basic concept. It could be the structural mounts for hybrid operating theaters, cath labs, and so on as well. You can even do fire suppression for renovation projects and the audio and video. And so what it actually does up front, it does all your vendor and service coordination. So we know where instead of having 8 to 10 duct connections for a multi-diffuser array, you can have between 1 and 2 ducts. All your wiring is pre-done in the factory, and so it includes mechanical, structural, and electrical all in a single package. You also know your structural calculations up front, so your loads and reactions before you even go and calculate your slabs, whether it's post-tension, whether it's using some more of the modular components and so on. You know all that in advance. We just need to know what we're hanging. And in some of the more complicated things, are we doing a biplane, a single plane, and so on. And also I think for those in the procurement side of things, you can scream ahead and you can go off and build your theater because you can hang anybody's pendant or light. So it's all pre-calculated, vendor neutral, it doesn't matter. All your lighting calculations are done up front. What you see on the left is a conventional lighting with all the different fixtures. What you see on the right, obviously a lot greater lighting. It's amazing how much the surgeons and the people that work in that room actually appreciate a brighter room than what the guidelines actually call for. Now, these are obviously dimmable. You don't have to be working that bright and so on. Another thing to consider when I absolutely loved the presentation before, faster, better, cheaper. And this is something to consider when you're doing your master plans and schematic designs, this is called the interstitial space. I'm working on a hospital project right now with 5.5 meters slab to slab, okay? But standard in Australia, I think everybody would agree with me, is 4.5 to 4.8. So why do we have 4.5? What's the rationale behind driving that from hospital project to hospital project? And really what it is, it's the services requirement. The builder needs so much space to rough in all the services in your hot floors, okay? So it's usually about 600-700 mil they ask for. And the reason why they need the 600-700 mil or 4.5 is because the conventional mechanical systems are usually around 800, 900, a lot of the systems, a lot of the boxes. So what does that leave? That leaves that 700 mil for the ducts and the power and all these different things above. But what happens if there was a better way? What happens if we could actually decrease that floor to 4 meters or by half a meter? Let's just call it half a meter for argument's sake. And the reason why you can do that now is because technology exists that are higher performing systems that can be built in as little as 300 mil, standard's 350, which still gives the services consultants their 600-700 mil above to do their services. Now, some of the towers that we're working on with some of the builders, if you shaved a half a meter off your building, how many millions of dollars would you save on your project? Less facade, less glass, less building materials, more sustainable building, yet you haven't compromised the services requirement for the other trades and services. Something to think about. The next thing is we are actually, the operating theater, people don't realize this, but still is the place where it's the #1 place where people get infections in hospitals. Surgical site infections, it happens in the operating theater. Despite all the hand wash and everything we're doing, they stubbornly remain at a very similar rate if you look at the data in Australian hospitals. So one of the reasons is we've got a wide variety of guidelines in this country. What we do in WA is different than Queensland, different in New South Wales, different in Victoria, and so on. And I've had the privilege now of being part of over 1,000 operating theater projects in this country. And even when they're the same group, oftentimes you go, it's a completely different mechanical design, even though they're built at the same time. So you're paying for that design again, and you're actually paying for a wide variety of performance. If you look at that theater there, if you run a CFD model through it, that's actually how it performs, and that meets the Australian Health Facility Guidelines, 10 CFUs per cubic meter, which is actually 3.5 million particles. We heard from Ben earlier. 3.5 million particles per cubic meter in the sterile field, with the patient on the operating table actually meets the current guidelines. Versus there is technology out here with the same modular systems. That's how the particles can perform, 1,000 times less particles in the sterile field, independently assessed by multiple companies throughout the country. The third point I want you to remember now is sustainable energy efficient systems. We heard a lot about that today, how important it is to build a resilient country and so on. I'm not going to go through all that kind of stuff, but obviously it lowers the operational costs. People don't know, but the operating theater is the highest energy consumer in the hospital. And it actually gets even a lot worse if you actually go up to far north Queensland when you're dealing with things like humidity, high humidity versus down in Adelaide, down here. I'm going to give you an example here. 2 different operating theaters, and we actually had the University as a private hospital customer, and they said, how much energy would we actually save, Chad, if we went modular versus conventional? Here's 2 operating theaters that were built in Adelaide a couple years ago. So the mechanical and electricians came in and installed a whole bunch of devices to collect the data over a 6-month period. They ran a report, and what they actually found is the one on the left, and the reason we have to do it in the same town, because obviously you need the same temperature and humidity and the same weather patterns. Okay, so this is in Adelaide. I was told it would actually probably be 3 times the savings if it was far north Queensland. But between those 2 hospitals, exact same size air diffuser, one had 10 HEPA filters, one had 9, but the exact same air diffuser, $22,000 a year. That was 3 years ago. Energy savings over 25 years, over $500,000 of savings. At 4 theaters, $2.2 million, saving over 5,000 tons of CO2 emissions. Now, if you were to scale that, say, across Queensland, that's building 100 operating theaters over the next 5 years, you got a significant reduction in your carbon footprint while providing a better performing system. The next thing I wanted to talk about briefly is really challenging convention. And the reason why I say that is we invest heavily, what I call the front door of the hospital. And it's amazing what we're actually doing these days. They're like shopping centers when you come in there. You know, and they should be. They're places of healing and hope and places of community and so on. But for many patients, and this is what I've learned from the surgeons and anesthetists that I work very closely with, is the operating room now is the front door for many, many patients. And the reason why I say that is with the change of patients coming in and having joint replacements and going home in 1 to 2 days now, the patients are walking into the operating theater. There's no anesthetic bay. So what do you think they remember in their time of greatest anxiety? The operating theater. You know, they're actually talking to the surgeon, the anesthetist, the scrub nurse, the anesthetic nurse before they go under. It's a very, very memorable place for them. And this is a true story. I've actually been twice on the plane in the last 6 weeks, just sitting by people that had surgery, believe it or not, in that operating theater. Never met them before a day in my life. And they were just telling me that one guy had his hip replaced, one had his knee replaced. And they said, frequent flyers, because I guess when you start getting your joints replaced, it tends to be hip, knee. And so these patients had actually had multiple surgeries in multiple hospitals, and they're telling me how amazing this experience was at this particular hospital, and how memorable it was, from how it looked so clean, how bright, and how they were treated, and so on. And that picture back here was actually from one of the patients that was a friend of a friend that actually called someone that works for me. And the same thing, they were just like, had never actually been in something that looked so amazing and so on. So these places are actually memorable. And as you can see, there's nothing hanging on the wall. There's nothing that you can get dust behind. There's no cupboards that you have to clean or so on. Everything's very clean. And the other thing is, this operating theater will last for the next 30 years. I've had the privilege of working with a large tertiary hospital that was built amazingly 12 years ago. But guess what? 12 years later, they need to refresh everything. You know how disruptive that is for being the main tertiary hospital for a community, to shut down your service, to have to redo the vinyl on the walls, the floors, and everything like that. Massive impact on the waiting list impact, and also the cost of that as well, especially if you're in the private sector when it comes to your revenue. So these theaters, as we know, these glass windows here, they will not age. They'll always look brand new. And so on. There's another perspective for you. Everything built out of glass and corian. And they will not crack. We've now got 800 theaters installed globally around the world with not one crack, and it comes with a lifetime guarantee of 30 years. So, but what's the value position? Because we've had to say it faster, better, cheaper, right? So yes, it will still cost you a little bit more up front, but as soon as you do one renovation, you're in the black. And that's before you measure any of the disruption to clinical services, the length of stay on wait lists and so on. And we've heard a lot of wonderful things today, and I do hope that I get invited back to stand up here in a year or two with the architects that were part of this design process for these hospitals, because we now are building theaters. We use the words of art and imagery and so on, where we now have an operating theater of the Kimberleys. We got another one of the forest. We got another one of the beach. Because a lot of times the people that work in these environments, they work in windowless rooms. I mean, thankfully here we got windows in theaters, but not always. Depends on the design and what they're giving. But working in these environments for 12 years, working on very complicated cases, when this might be life or death some of these times, you got to think of other people feel in these environments as well. And so we really want to look after the people that work in these environments every day. We heard it's hard to recruit staff, nurses, doctors in regional communities, and so on. If we create the best environment so they can do the best that they can achieve in, then I think that will help in that regard. So thank you very much for the opportunity. I look forward to having a cocktail with you guys. And thanks a lot to AHDC. Really appreciate the opportunity.